1. The Third Child. 11 years later, 175 Americ era. Beryl Nessak knelt to buckle a sword on her 4-year-old son and sat back on her heels with a worried look. "Must you take him, Hangst?" she pleaded. "He is frightened." Horth looked up at the large man dressed in a long Admiralty cloak. He liked the red dragon that clawed at Hangst Nersal's collar and swept down one side of his body, embroidered in russet and crimson. The dragon's tail went all the way around the back, ending near the tip of his father's sword. Mother felt firm and sheltering, standing behind Horth. He resisted the urge to back up into her skirts and hide there. He was fearless at sword practice, according to his trainer, Hara, and his brother, Zrenal, who had taken him up in a Rel ship a few times, said he took to it so naturally it was irksome. But what he faced now was neither swords nor ships. It was a court reception. "Horth's biggest risk," Hangst told Beryl cheerfully, "will be dying of boredom, listening to the Ava's heralds recite every one of baby Amel's Demish ancestors." He grinned. "I suspect they'll leave out the dash of red relish in the child. I am surprised they haven't dyed Amel's hair blonde and found a way to make his eyes blue instead of gray." Father was amused by his own cleverness. "There will be too many people there," Beryl insisted. "Branst will keep an eye out for him," Father promised her. "And so will Zrenal." He did not mention Hara, but Horth was not surprised. Father had given up talking about his retainers and staff in front of Mother, because Mother didn't like anyone who wasn't highborn. Hara belonged to the noble-born challenge class, which meant that in Mother's terms, she wasn't Sevolite enough to qualify as an Eternal. Mother's hands began to dig into Horth's shoulders. "Let me keep Horth apart to myself, Hangst, please, just Horth. He isn't suited to the sly ways of your Ava's court. Horth is too honest." "Honest?" Father laughed the way he did when he felt more threatening than threatened. A rough, aggressive sound. "How would you know, Beryl? Does he talk to you more than he talks to us?" "I know his soul," Mother insisted. "Neither his life nor his soul will be in any jeopardy today, I promise," said Father. "It is just a genotyping, even if it is an imperial one. Your own Nessak priests test children to confirm how Sevolite they are. You have told me that yourself." "Priests are not Garerel Pull," said Beryl. "Garerel Pull practice Lorel arts." "We won't settle our differences on this or other matters today, my Nessak," said Hangst. "Nor in the next dozen lifetimes should we be doomed to spend them together, as you insist we are." He pulled her away from Horth into his arms. "But I like arguing with you," he said, smiling at her worried expression as he stroked her heart-shaped face with one large hand. She let herself be held a moment before grief distorted her features, and she pulled back, shaking with hard emotion. "Go," she said. "Take him, and go please your Relish sluts." Father sighed. "Beryl, so far it has only been the one, and it's political, I've explained that." She listened in stony silence. Horth, like his brothers, was perfectly aware how she felt about Father resuming a sexual relationship with Tash Brillet, an important vassal. Father put out his hand. "Horth, come." With a last glance at his mother, Horth left her side to take his father's hand. It was a good, strong hand. It filled him with confidence. He was afraid, yes, but he would conduct himself with honor because his family was there to watch. It was a family that extended backwards and forward in time, spanning the living and the dead, with the living ones merely the happy few riding the curve of the Rel symbol's S-shaped arc between the barbed hooks that symbolized birth and death. There was a Rel symbol embroidered on Horth's shirt. Mother did it herself. She used dyes from the plants that she raised in her special garden inside the nursery's greenhouse, the one with the real Nessak soil in it, that she had brought with her from San Home. That was the only soil, she said, that would grow special plants. Magic soil that connected her soul to her ancestors. Horth stroked the symbol with his finger once for courage, remembering some of Mother's maxims. Your soul is older than your memories, was one. Laurel's used truth to tell lies, was another one she liked a lot. And a clean soul is better than a bad life. He had memorized many of her sayings, even if he never spoke them aloud. But as usual, he could not decide how to apply even one of them. Horth and his father left the nursery and passed down the connected rooms of the throat, which ran the length of the family residence, Blackhearth. Hara stood waiting in the entrance hall, a sturdy-looking woman who headed up the house guard of nobleborns known as knights errant, or simply errants, because they were on loan from vassal families. Hara disliked Horth's mother as much as mother disliked Hara, but she was fiercely loyal to father and generally fond of his hearth children, despite the abnormality of Horth and his brothers being raised in Blackhearth. Horth had heard all about it. He knew that the hearth children of a male liege were supposed to be the children of his sisters or aunts. A marriage like that of Horth's parents was not Vrelish at all, it was Demish. Or even worse, Nessak. And the Vrelish resented it. A lot. Horth's brothers, Zrenel and Branst, were waiting with Hara and her errants. "We're bringing Horth," exclaimed Branst, aged 7. "What's it look like, dummy?" answered Zrenel, who was 10 years old. "Branst, I expect you to look after Horth," said father. "Can't Zrenel for once?" Branst protested. "Everyone's going to be there." "You mean everyone is in Tezotat Monitum?" said Zrenel, well aware of his younger brother's obsession with the girl next door at Greenhearth. "She'll never like you, stupid. You're half Nessak." "Stupid yourself," cried Branst. "Simmer down, boys," ordered Hara, setting her thick arms akimbo and grinning at them. "Horth doesn't need looking after when he's got a sword." Horth was used to her joking like that. Hara liked to show off what she called his instinct for the art of fencing by encouraging older children to take him on. Horth liked the challenge, but the experience had made him acutely aware of size and age disparities in any serious bout. Hara ruffled Branst's hair. "As for you, my randy one, what will we do with you? Only 7 and pursuing a woman twice as old." Branst ducked out from under her affectionate razzing. "It's not like that," he muttered. "Then it might be Horth who has to protect you from Tessatat," Hara continued to tease Branst. "If you keep bobbing about her heels like a silly Tarkian farm puppy, when you aren't even equipped yet to follow through on promises." "I said it wasn't like that," said Branst, quite thoroughly red in the face now. "That's enough, all of you," said Hangst. "Branst, you will keep an eye on Horth, is that understood? I promised your mother someone would, and I need Zrenel with me." "It's not fair," Branst complained, as they followed father out. "Just because Zrenel is older, he gets to do what he wants." "Nothing's fair in life except a witnessed duel," Hara told him. "And Zrenel isn't merely older. He is better at most things than you are. But cheer up. With those good looks, you'll be popular with all the women once you grow up." "I don't want all the women," muttered Branst. "Hush," Hara admonished him more harshly. "Stop sounding like a Nessak." The reception lay beyond the big double doors that opened onto Fountain Court. Horth waited breathlessly for the family herald to swing them open, dreading the moment when they would have to go out and face the crowd. There were so many Demish at court. More than there were Vrelish in the entire universe, Horth often thought. But it wasn't merely being outnumbered that bothered him. The trouble with the Demish was that they talked and talked. Fountain Court was an 8-sided courtyard with 8 grand doors leading to the 8 hearths that served the Empire's ruling families as residences when they were at court under the Ava's eye. The fountain at its center was white marble. Usually, the court felt still and cool, but today it brimmed with food and noise and decorations. Horth had been hearing for days about all the Demish people arriving from across the Empire to witness baby Amel being genotyped. The Demish men stood about, stiffly, in costumes that proclaimed their ancestry. Their women also wore braid patterns worked in embroidery, but not in ways that interfered with being fashionable. Horth was bewildered by their hairstyles and long, elaborate dresses, with great flows of hanging tassels at their waists and shoulders. The Demish women did not wear swords, but it would have been virtually impossible to fight in such clothes, even if they had. The few Vrelish in the crowd wore short vests decorated in the distinctive patterns of their house braid. Under the decorative vests, they wore plain shirts and tightly fitted pants that had enough stretch for complete freedom of movement. All the Vrelish wore swords, regardless of their sex, and the women were as likely as the men to sport liege marks to show they had led their clans. Demish sheep, Hara muttered, as a group of Demish women flocked about the entrance to Blue Hearth where the Ava was making his entrance. Ava Delm was a dazzling figure, his cloak studded in jewels and lined in less showy but more valuable cat fur. Horth thought the Ava looked silly, but most of the Demish in the room were pulled in his direction like iron filings to a magnet. Horth noticed that a sculpture of Baby Amel's head had been inserted into the fountain that Fountain Court was named for. The face was colored to look realistic except for its exaggerated size. The water splashing down over the child's dark curls troubled Horth. If the baby were real, he would be cold. He decided it was monstrous to put a huge severed head in the fountain like that. It made no sense to him at all, nor did the other decorations and arrangements, like the animals made of sweetened protein paste that were being cut up and distributed by an army of giggling female Demish children, dressed as servants, who were very ineptly serving the treats to their families. Real servants would have done the job much better, Horth thought. Other Demish children fished for things in the fountain with ridiculous little stick toys, and a commoner choir sang play songs and lullabies, as if the severed head in the fountain could hear. The only meaningful part of the whole scene was the genotyping apparatus set out near Green Hearth and manned by Gorell Pulls from all the houses present, so they could check each other's work. Green Hearth's Gorell Pull would take blood samples from Baby Amel, and then run them through the gene reader of Lorel manufacture that looked more or less like a big metal box when it was all closed up. Then each Gorell Pull would repeat the process until all were satisfied with the outcome. Angst! A dark-haired man knifed through the crowd from the direction of Green Hearth next door. Daimon, Father greeted the newcomer, and clasped sword arms. Father used his right arm, and Daimon used his left one. You brought them all this time, I see, Daimon said, with a nod in Horth's direction. I considered what you said about letting Beryl isolate them, said Horth's father. Even if it is not hard to understand why she is protective. He never spoke, except to Branst and Baby Grammar, and now he does not even do that much anymore. Horth has a Vrelish look about him, said Daimon. He will talk when he's sure he has something worth saying. Exactly my feeling about it, Liege Monitum, said Hara. All that silence is a good sign, not a problem. Horth understands more than he says, I know. All the more reason why you shouldn't let his mother monopolize him then, Daimon told Hangst. Beryl is entitled to her opinions, said Father. Nessak opinions, Daimon objected. They were interrupted by the arrival of a teenaged girl dressed in Daimon's colors. She had brown hair, which was unusual in Sevelites, but her sword and clothes preempted the possibility of her being a servant. She wore the same house crest as Daimon, and her braid proclaimed her a member of his family. Branst was immediately riveted. I understand congratulations are in order, Liege Nersal, said the girl, who Horth knew was named Tessitat. Rumor has it that Horth is no longer your youngest child. Liege Brillet's child has genotyped as mine, Father acknowledged. Yes, I owed her one. The gift child is an encouraging sign, said Daimon. But it has been 4 years since the term of your marriage expired. When are you planning to send for the Nessaks? Marriages don't expire, put in Zrenal. Mine did, Hanks told his son, curtly, when Horth was born. Then why haven't you sent Mother back to San Home? Branst wanted to know, his eyes bright with the threat of that looming betrayal and the hope of its denial. It's a good question, Hangst, said Daimon. Horth listened very hard, as intense about the question as his brothers. It kept coming up, but Father never answered. It was no different this time. Still, it's good news, right? Tessitat said brightly. About Liege Brillet's baby? Mother doesn't think so, muttered Zrenal. She didn't say everyone thought so, Brance defended his idol to his brother. Tessitat, said Daimon, why don't you take Horth and Brance to fish for trinkets in the fountain? Silverheart's ladies-in-waiting made a great production of the children's entertainment. It would be a good thing to show them that Vrelish children can play just like Demish ones do. I'm not a child, Brance objected. Fine then. Stay here, Tessitat told him, and put out a hand to Horth. Her hand had the hard-muscled feel of all Vrelish adults who studied the sword. He doesn't talk, Brance explained, catching up to them a moment later. Maybe you've never kept quiet long enough to let him, said Tessitat. By now they had reached the fountain where a peppering of blonde children, ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers, were plucking brightly colored packages out of the water with the stick toys that Horth had seen earlier. The painted sticks ended in hooks used for catching a loop on the packages. This is so dumb, said Brance. Tessitat thrust one stick into his hand and another into Horth's. Afraid you'll be shown up? Me? Said Brance. A baby could snag one of those. Tessitat gestured for him to demonstrate. Brance frowned and thrust himself between a couple of girls in flounced dresses, startling them. Hey! One of the Demish boys grabbed Brance by the shoulder. Tessitat pushed herself forward. Pick on someone your own size, Blondie. That's right. Get your big, mean Vrelish sister to rescue you, the Demish boy mocked. She's not my sister, cried Brance. How do you know? The boy hurled back. Vrelish women sleep with anyone. Tessitat hit the Demish boy square in the mouth. He reeled and staggered into waiting arms. Not quite anyone, said Tessitat, grinning at her victim with a look of unrepentant sexual confidence. He has to look like he'll be worth the trouble. One of the blonde girls went white and swooned, collapsing a whole raft of her friends as she went down. The next moment, anxious mothers and angry Demish men descended, followed by Daimon. Sorry, uncle, Tessitat greeted him, looking abashed. Daimon helped the injured boy up and began negotiating terms of an apology from Tessitat with the offended adults. Horth put his stick down and turned to face the mass of people that filled Fountain Court, all talking at once. For a moment, the sound was a single roar. He fought down panic and was ashamed to be afraid of mere talk. He decided he would cross the floor on his own, just to prove that he could. He had to concentrate to prevent the babble of voices from disturbing him, which is why it was possible for a woman to startle him by touching his arm. Oh, look, it's a Vrelish child, she cried aloud. A couple of her friends scurried up beside her. Horth held his ground. It's all right, dear, the Demish woman said, settling down in front of Horth in a rustle of skirts. An artificial fragrance of flowers wafted off her. I won't hurt you, she cooed. Her friends crouched down beside her to inspect Horth. Isn't he cute? Exclaimed a woman with an astonishing garden of flowers worked in stiff silk across her bosom. Horth reached out to see what they were like. The woman giggled nervously at his touch. Oh my, they are precocious. He's only curious, said the third woman, and offered Horth the hem of her fur-trimmed cloak to feel. Aren't you, lamb? Horth's brow furrowed as he tried to decode that extraordinary remark. He knew that a lamb was an animal raised for slaughter. He therefore concluded that this was an insult, and hit the woman squarely in the nose. He deemed the attack proper because they were both in the highborn challenge class, and since she was so much bigger than him, he didn't understand the resulting fuss. Father waded into the midst of the row and scooped Horth up, leaving Daimon to soothe the ruffled Demish who were trying to stem the flow of blood from the injured woman's nose. Horth felt perfectly safe and vindicated, sitting in the crock of Father's arm, with his legs brushing against the top of Hank's sheathed sword. As they approached the entrance to Blue Hearth, Hank stopped and nodded in the direction of the lavishly dressed man surrounded by admiring courtiers. That's the Ava, Hanks told Horth. He is not what an Ava should be, but the Empire is short of purebloods. That is our excuse for having him produce a mel with Avrel, his own half-sister. Our excuse for the whole 10-child contract. 1 down, 9 to go. He held Horth a little tighter. Mine, with your mother, was for 3 of you. Horth already knew all that, but people often told him things he already knew. He relied on it, in fact, since it usually took 3 or 4 times before he understood. Horth pointed at the genotyping machine, which was much more interesting than the Ava. Father smiled at him. Right, he said. Why am I not surprised? They went over to Daimon's Guerrero Pull, Cyrillus, a woman with white hair and the wrinkled skin that proved she was not an Eternal, like Horth and his family. Father hitched Horth up a notch against his side. Open the genotyping unit for my son here, so we can have a look at it, he ordered. Cyrillus obeyed, revealing a series of processing chambers nestled in a mass of nerve cloth patches with colored nerve cloth threads connecting them. It reminded Horth of the intricately woven braid patterns that people wore on their vests to show their lineage. Laurel science, said Hangst, when Cyrillus had closed up the machine again. Why do we trust it, I wonder? Do you wish an answer, Liege Nassau? Asked the Guerrero Pull. One you might be able to relay to your wife, perhaps? Hangst frowned. No answer could satisfy Beryl because she asks no questions. She is merely certain. He reflected on his own words a moment, and added, It is a refreshing perspective, after living so many years with your Master Daimon's many complex doubts. Monitum has always believed in the power of questions, Cyrillus said primly, and the value of all humans, whether highborns, lesser Sevelites, or commoners. In their place, you mean? Said Hangst. Yes, of course, but... A scream ripped down Horth's spine. Hangst spun, putting Horth down behind him. Horth peered around his father's legs as a woman with a mass of black hair tore out of blue hearth to hurl herself at the Ava, scattering his courtiers. She was intercepted by the Ava's Guerrero Pull and raked his face with her clawed hands. Demish men rushed to protect their Ava, and Daimon seized the mad woman. She fought with the blind, inept fury. Hara joined Hangst. She had Branston's Rennell with her. Take them in, Hangst ordered his captain of errants. Amel! The mad woman wailed in a voice like a lost soul. My baby! That was all Horth saw before Hara herded him and his brothers off Fountain Court. Mother stood in the entrance hall of Black Hearth with one of her Nessac retainers beside her. 5 such men came with her, but Father only allowed 1 in Black Hearth at any time. Horth ran straight into Mother's open arms. Brance got a hug next, then Zrenel. Something bad happened, said Zrenel. Avim Avrel is screaming about baby Amel. I was told to bring them in, Hara told the children's mother. Beryl rose, holding Horth in her arms with Brance plastered against her skirts and Zrenel standing beside her. She stared Hara down, but refused to speak to her, as usual. Hara cursed Nessacs under her breath as she stalked off. Hara's all right, really, Mother, said Brance, plucking at her sleeve in an uncertain manner. You have no idea what she's like, Beryl snapped. She put Horth down but kept hold of his hand. Come. Her retainer, Liewolf, followed like a shadow as they passed through the series of connected rooms, known as the Throat, that divided Black Hearth down the middle. Brance and Zrenel both talked at once. Tessatat looked worried, exclaimed Brance. If Father has to duel, said Zrenel, can we go back out to watch? Hush, ordered Beryl. There is no question here of duels. But Horth felt her grip tighten. The last duel Father fought had been against a member of the Kimstan. Kimstan were relatives on Father's side, with the right to challenge him for his title. They included, in particular, Hank's adult children sired on his vassals. which was another reason Mother didn't like them. At the end of the throat, Lywolf left them. They turned right into Family Hall, headed for the nursery at its far end. The nursery was the family's place inside Black Hearth, and Barrow's sanctuary where no servants, or even nobleborns like Hara, were allowed. Inside, it was one big room, with a practice floor for fencing, a potted garden with a yard and shed, and one whole side covered in a rope net for climbing between platforms. This was the setting for a game the boys called Space War, in which the brothers rail-skimmed between platforms by swarming over the ropes. When Mother watched, the good guys were the Nessaks, but they switched sides whenever Father was around. Once, when some Kimpstan cousins were visiting, a fight broke out over the question of whether Nessaks could be honorable. Zrenal threw the first punch. Horth and Brance did their best to help their older brother until Hara and her house guards broke it up. "I bet baby Amel was murdered," said Zrenal. "I bet Evrel got rid of him because he wasn't pureblood after all, and Delm wasn't the sire. A genotyping would have shown it up, so Evrel had him murdered. Women do that, don't they, Mother?" Mother gasped. "Not," she exclaimed, "for a reason like that." Predictably, Brance took the opposite side from his older brother. "Amel's mother didn't do it," he said. "She was trying to rip the Ava's eyes out." Zrenal shrugged. "Pure blood of Rel is a spoiled brat. Even your precious Monetee's girlfriend acknowledges that much." "Tessitat is not my girlfriend," said Brance. Mother snapped out of the shocked silence inspired by Zrenal's glib assumption of infanticide on Evrel's part, and looked for Brance, who was sitting on a heap of folded gym mats. "Tessitat?" she asked. "Have you been playing with that green hearth nobleborn again, Brance?" "Not exactly playing," answered Zrenal. "She was babysitting." "You take that back," Brance said, closing his hands and fists. "Not now, boys," their mother cried, and collapsed into the armchair where she liked to sit and watch them tend their potted gardens with her indoor greenhouse at her back. Mother required them to make things grow for the spiritual exercise, but only Brance paid much attention. Zrenal's pots weren't doing so well, and Horth's last crop of Sanhome bean sprouts had died. Again. "I don't know how much more I can take of this mad, cruel court. Oh, my ancestors!" Beryl appealed to empty air, and lowered her face into her hands with a sob. Horth never knew what to do when Mother cried. He felt it was something Father should look after, even though Father was usually the cause. Horth did not like members of the family crying at all, because it never happened to him. It was another of the ways in which he was different. Hara said that was nothing to worry about. She said that Vrelish people did not cry. But Horth wasn't sure he wanted to always be the one who was more Vrelish than the rest of the family. The three boys waited in suspense for their mother to stop crying and look up. When she did, her face was reassuringly composed. "I suppose we wait," Beryl told her children with a brave smile, "to find out what this latest atrocity is about." She surveyed the state of Horth and Zrenal's seedlings. "It looks like the two of you will be doing some replanting to pass the time. Horth, you have to water seedlings or they die." "I forgot to remind him," said Brance. "That should not have to be your job. Go get us something to eat, will you, Brance, while your brothers put these poor things out of their misery and start over." "Yes, Mother," Brance agreed, and scampered off. "Remember not to let the servants touch what we eat," Mother called after him, and was worried by a perfunctory one-handed wave. Zrenal frowned. He and Horth both knew there was about as much chance of Brance doing his own work in the kitchen as there was of Horth's next batch of seedlings surviving long enough to bear fruit. He always got the servants to do his work for him, but Zrenal never shared the fact with Mother. Horth and Zrenal settled down to work on dumping out their pots and replanting. Brance was back with sandwiches before they were done and helped Horth finish. Then the family picnicked, seated on the coarse brown matting in front of Beryl's greenhouse. Father joined them as they were finishing their lunch. Usually, he would simply come over and sit down, wordlessly becoming one of them without explanations or any confusing talk. Today, he stopped a short distance from the blanket Mother had spread on the ground, as if waiting to be invited or repulsed. Mother stopped telling Brance not to play with his food and sat, gathering her courage for a moment. Then, she stood up slowly and carefully, her face stiff with injured pride, and turned to face her husband. "So," she confronted Hangst, "what lurid decadence have your so-called purebloods indulged in now?" Father had looked tired and strained before she lashed out, but the very peevishness of her manner roused him to chide her in his frank, familiar manner. "So-called? You can't begrudge the Ava and his half-sister their blood, my Nessak. Whatever we might think of the wisdom of such souls being eternal, they do possess them, even by your standards. Perhaps it is their upbringing you ought to blame for their bad behavior, as you blame mine." "You," Mother said with surprise, and softened. "I have never reproached your behavior with regard to how you lead your house. You are the only decent liege on Fountain Court. As for you being here, instead of where you belong, I know you had cause to side against us when you threw in with House Lorvrel, all those years and so many mistakes ago." "Threw in with—" Father shook his head incredulously. "God's barrel! That was Nersal Nessak. Please restrict your criticisms to my current incarnation, whatever may or may not be the history of my soul. Nersal, Prince of Nessak, is my ancestor as far as I'm concerned, and nothing more. This is the only life that I can answer for." "Then tell me why you serve such a vain and spiteful weakling as your Ava," said Mother as she sat down. "I told you," Hangst flared, "it is not Delm I care about, it is upholding the Empire." "You admit, then, that you are falsely sworn?" Beryl stayed on the attack. "All this business of the Empire is Laurel's sophistry, straight out of Daimon's mouth. Trust your instincts, my love. Daimon is no friend to you, no true Borello. And such a thing as Delm would never last a day as Ava under sword law. He would never be Kisk on San Home, that is certain." "I know," Father sighed. "You Nessaks manage things better by lumping all highborns together, instead of wallowing in this Demish trap of insisting that your emperor be a pureblood. But it is a Demish court, so please," he raised one large hand, "no more, Beryl. Not now." "Is there going to be a duel?" Zrenal asked. Hanks shook his head. "A council of privilege, and after that, a trial of honor." "But it might end in a duel." Zrenal held out hope. Hanks smiled at him wistfully. "Perhaps." "Is baby Amel dead?" Brance wanted to know. "Missing." Hanks let out a frustrated sigh. "Come with me to the family lounge, Beryl, and I'll tell you more." "Without the children, you mean?" she asked, and got stubborn. "No, I want them to know from your lips the truth about the man you call your Ava." Father grew angry at that. "Amel has disappeared, yes, but Delm is guilty of nothing more than being a silly fool." Father paused, trapped by his own disgust because it gave Mother weapons. "It was Evrel," he said curtly. "She is at fault." Beryl replied stonily, "The baby's mother?" Hanks nodded. "Apparently Evrel could not afford to have Fountain Court finding out who really sired her baby. But she tried to make it look as if Delm feared the child's arrival, in order to blame Delm for the baby's disappearance." Hanks gave a gruff snort. "How could Delm see his son as a rival when Evrel is the Empire's last female pureblood? Do they think we would stoop to breeding the son back to his own mother?" "You forced a child contract on half-siblings, didn't you?" asked Beryl, mercilessly. "You, Silver Hearth, and Daimon?" "We have to function in a Demish court," insisted Father. "No," Beryl said simply. "You don't." "You make it sound so simple," he said, looking away from her. "It is not." "How can that be so, husband?" asked Beryl. "Okal demands that a leader have the honor to risk himself in personal combat, rather than risk destroying habitat in space wars. That is simple. Now tell me, has Delm ever wielded a sword in his own cause? Okal demands that Eternals use their power to control soulless ones, who lack the hope of rebirth to restrain them from destroying all they cannot have. But would Delm hesitate to crack a station or use bioscience to pursue his goals? Would Daimon? Father stiffened at the mention of Daimon and said through his teeth, "Daimon is honorable." Beryl sniffed and shook her hair back. "Well," she said, "perhaps you ought to make Avrel your Ava. She at least had the sense to deny Delm a child. Is the real father known?" "We think so," Hanks said, thickly, looking from her to their children, who listened with rapt attention. "But it only gets worse, Beryl. I will tell you when we are alone." "No, let them hear it from you," said Mother. "Not from strangers." Father unbuckled his sword and set it in a rack by the chair he used when he spent time in the nursery. Then he sat down, facing a jumble of ill-tended pots. Beryl's greenhouse stood at their backs, and the remains of their picnic was spread out on the floor before them. Horth and his brothers closed in by unspoken agreement. "How can I explain this to you, Beryl?" Hanks said. "I'm not sure if you even understand how different Vrelish women are. If you have ever even heard what high-born Vrelish women can do to a man." He broke off. Mother wore a brittle, cold look. "I am aware of man-rape, if that is what you are dancing around," she rattled off, making Zrenel start and Brance look puzzled. "Are you telling me Avrel is guilty of that?" "Her behavior would seem to suggest she is predisposed, yes," said Hangst. He added quickly, "It is not condoned, even by the Vrelish. It is considered slaw. If she is found guilty, she'll be punished." He sighed. "Daimon is looking for baby Amel. He will find the child if anyone can, but I'm afraid the most likely way to lose him would have been for her to order her Guerrero Pull, who is dead now, to drop him down a recycling chute. Her servants have confirmed she gave the baby to her Guerrero Pull, Aris, to smuggle out of Blue Hearth. We are aware of other things as well, things that do not say much for her character. In particular," he continued flatly, "it appears that she killed Eris soon after he returned from the job, and killed him with an overdose of the sex drug known as Rush. It is possible for Vrelish women to force an unwilling Vrelish man without Rush." He paused, as if the word made him uncomfortable. "It is less likely to work with commoners, and Guerrero Pull can be rendered impotent by their pain training, which reduces sensitivity in general. Hence, I suppose, the drug. She used it regularly on Aris. Her servants told Daimon as much." "Then Avrel did kill her own child?" Beryl swallowed thickly, tears of horror welling up in her eyes. "And made a mockery of the most sacred act." Hangst pulled her into the shelter of his arms and she clung. He stood a head taller, with Mother's mass of blue-black hair against his chest and a big hand stroking her back. Zrenel gestured towards the door. Brance missed the cue. Horth poked him in the ribs and tipped his head towards Zrenel, who had already retreated to the nursery door. But Brance was riveted. Horth lingered, not wanting to leave without his favorite brother. "I can't do it, Beryl," Hanks said throatily. "I can't send you home. I want you too much. And Daimon is correct. It will cause trouble. More trouble than it has before." "I am your wife," she said, listening to his heart. He shook his head. "No, the contract's done." "I am your wife," she insisted, and lifted her head to shake out her wavy dark locks. "And your Sherst, your one true love." Father's voice was rich with pain, too. "Don't, Beryl." "Nothing can change that," Mother told him, with heartless conviction. He said tonelessly, "You don't want me to child gift to my vassals, yet you still want more children of your own." "Of course," she said. "I would fear the anger of the waiting dead if we denied them new lives." She stroked his arm. Father closed his eyes again, as if to shut out the sight of her, but he couldn't shut out her smell or touch. Grown-ups can be very silly, thought Horth. "If only I could make you Vrelish," Father muttered. "Then I would be your McCanst," said Beryl, and take my children home with me to be raised by my uncles and brothers." Mother drew back to look up. "Is that what you want?" Father stiffened. She dropped at his feet without warning, repentant. "I don't want it either. I don't want to leave you, Hangst. But I cannot stop thinking that they must be wondering on San Home if I've broken faith with them in my mission. You know I could never do that." "I know," said Hangst in a drained voice, and extended his hand to her where she knelt. "It has been a trying day, my Nessak. Please get up." Mother had lost now, Horth realized. Father was using his formal court voice again. Beryl got up slowly, looking miserable. Father left the nursery without a word of reassurance. Mother picked up his forgotten sword and set the sheathed weapon across her lap, sitting in the chair Hangst had abandoned. Horth considered taking off before she remembered that it was spiritually uplifting for her sons to clean up their own lunch things and tidy up, but her distress prevented him. "It is the greatest love," she whispered, touching Hank's sword gingerly with one hand. "The hardest one." Horth took a step towards her, and she looked up. "Oh, Horth, I am living with the enemy," she cried, and thrust a fist into her mouth as she began to cry. "Mother, no!" cried Branst, coming back. Zrenel reappeared, having seen Hangst leave the nursery, and came to kneel beside her. "We will never abandon you," her eldest son promised. "Oh, my boys," she cried, and put the sword aside to gather them in her arms. "My own beloved ancestors made young." She hugged them for as long as Horth could stand, before she remembered the lunch things needed to be cleaned up, which felt reassuringly normal, however unwelcome the chore. The next day, after morning exercise with Hara, Horth found his brothers sitting on a bed in the room he shared with Branst in Family Hall. "There's no point asking Hara to explain it to you," Zrenel said. "Sure, she's Vrelish, but she's only noble-born. There are noble-born Vrelish who deny that man-rape is even possible, and the Demish all think it is make-believe as well. But there's Kimp Stan who will tell you they do it in Red Reach to captive enemies, to steal their ancestors' souls." "So Tessitat couldn't rape a man," said Branst. "Only highborns can." "Too bad, if you're curious," said Zrenel. Branst shoved him backwards off the bed. "Hey," complained Zrenel, climbing back up. "Don't be so touchy, Branst." "I don't believe man-rape is possible," protested Branst. "I mean, it isn't as if a man could be raped if he wasn't, you know." "Aroused," supplied Zrenel, with an older-than-you air that made Branst frown. "She eats him," Zrenel added, leaning forward. "That's how." Brant's lip curled. "How would that get her pregnant?" Zrenel rolled his eyes. "Not like food, you idiot. Female Vrilish have muscles in places that real women like Mother don't. But even so, it only works on Red Vrilish men because they're oversexed to start, like animals." "We're Vrilish," objected Branst. Zrenel shrugged. "Not that Vrilish," he said. "We're part Nessak." Neither of them noticed Horth leave the room. The honor trial for Evrel came and went with little disruption to Horth's life except for more gossip sessions between Zrenel and Branst. Evrel was found guilty and exiled, but on the day it happened, Horth was more interested in the automated watering system he was rigging for Mother. He demonstrated it by flooding the greenhouse floor. Mother told him it was clever before she took it apart and explained that she liked to take her time watering the plants. It never occurred to Horth that the shameful story of Evrel's trial would spread beyond the Ava's court. Then one morning during breakfast, Lywolf whispered something into Mother's ear that made her upset and excited. "Keen?" she gasped, and turned to her children. "Go and wait in the nursery." Father rose abruptly, making Mother start. The tension between them worried Horth as he followed his brothers out. "Who is Keen?" Branst asked Zrenel. Zrenel said glumly, "A Nessak." "No!" yelped Branst. Zrenel turned on him angrily. "It has to be a Nessak. Mother's 3-child contract is up and Father isn't sleeping with her anymore. They've sent somebody to reap the harvest and take us back." Branst flushed dark red. "I won't go!" "It's not up to you," Zrenal told him curtly, and climbed up to the platform in the nursery, where they played at keeping the universe safe for the next generation. Brance lodged himself in the rope net at the bottom. "But we're a family!" Brance cried suddenly, with a convulsive jerk at the ropes in his hands. "We're not supposed to be," Zrenal shot back. "Not like we are. Vrelish parents don't raise children together." Brance set his jaw stubbornly. "They could," he said, "if they are Sherstan." "Oh, please," groaned Zrenal. "It happens in real life," said Brance. "Tessatat's parents were Sherstan. That's why her mother had 2 children by the same noble-born man and would not give Daimon a high-born heir to raise in Greenhearth." "Don't be stupid," Zrenal hurled down from his platform. "Mother says she and father are Sherstan," Brance yelled back up. Zrenal jumped into a block of foam placed for that purpose and hurled himself violently at Brance. Horth moved between them, blocking Zrenal's charge. "What are you staring at, Rejact?" Zrenal snapped. "Don't call him that!" cried Brance. "He doesn't care." Zrenal shrugged off the insult. "He doesn't even understand." "He does too!" cried Brance, getting worked up. "And it isn't a joke. Hara says that the Nessaks killed defective children." Zrenal hunched his shoulders as if he felt cold. "That's right," he said, thunderstruck. "Brance, do you think they'd do that to Horth?" "Stop it!" exploded Brance. Zrenal lost his temper right back. "Just because you don't want to talk about something doesn't mean it won't happen." Brance flew at his larger, older sibling, shoving Horth aside so hard he fell down. Resigned, Horth got up and stood clear to watch. Zrenal shoved Brance into a rack of practice swords, but Brance was still fighting mad. He scrambled back to his feet, with one of the swords in hand. Horth frowned. The practice weapons were not sharp near the end like a challenge sword, and their points ended with rubber nubs, but the boys weren't supposed to use them without protective gear. Brance attacked. Zrenal blocked the slash at his head with an arm and yelped at the pain. Now Brance had made him mad. In seconds, Zrenal had disarmed his 7-year-old brother and was sitting astride him, raining down punches. Horth was afraid Zrenal might hurt Brance. He scooped up a hard bouncy ball and threw it with uncanny accuracy at Zrenal's forehead where the bone was thickest. It hit with a loud smack and bounced off. Zrenal shot up with a yell. "Boys!" Mother's voice made them all freeze in incriminating poses. She was furious, and what was worse, she sounded disappointed in them. "What are you doing?" "Just playing, Mother," said Zrenal, and reached down with one hand to help Brance up. Brance wiped blood from his mouth. "Playing?" Beryl Nessak asked frostily. Yes, Mother," stammered Brance. Horth stared past them at the stranger beside Beryl, who was beaming at them in amusement. "Don't scold your boys, sister," said the man with a good-natured laugh. "I would be sorry if I found them embroidering Demish cushions, now wouldn't I?" Brance and Zrenal exchanged looks. The ball that Horth had bounced off Zrenal's forehead ran out of momentum and crawled to a stop. Zrenal still had a red mark on his forehead where it had struck. "This is my brother, Prince Keen," said Mother. "He will address you in Rel peerage because we Nessaks do not acknowledge birth ranks." Keen had green eyes like Mother, and the same blue-black highlights in his hair. His smile of pleased amusement shed an unconditional blessing on the 3 of them. "I'll be staying with you here for a while," Keen said, as if it were perfectly ordinary for him to be visiting. "This is Zrenal," Beryl introduced her eldest. "The next one is Brance, and this—" she paused just long enough to show discomfort— "is Horth." "He isn't a Rejact," Brance spoke up, pale from the poundings Zrenal had inflicted on him except for the bright smears of blood around his mouth. "He understands. He just doesn't talk. I think he gets confused by all the complex stuff like differencing suffixes, and he doesn't like to do things he's not confident about." "Brance, please," said Beryl, embarrassed. Keen knelt down in front of Horth. "We don't think much of Demish grammar ourselves back on Sanhome," he assured Horth. "And as your mother said, we have no birth ranks." "Keen would be a royal blood by court usage," Beryl interjected. "At least I think he would, since we have the same parents and your father insisted I be genotyped." Keen gave her a look that made her uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," she apologized. "I know there is no point in being High Lord or royal blood or pure blood. It's a Demish error. I suppose it becomes a habit thinking like that." Keen rose and touched her elbow. "That's why you need to come home now. You and these fine sons," he smiled. "You have done well, sister." Mother kept her eyes down, but Horth saw her lids flutter. "Thank you," she said with real pleasure, and looked up at her brother with affectionate admiration. Keen retrieved the ball used to hit Zrenal and handed it to Horth. "You got Zrenal pretty good," he said, smiling. "Was it luck?" Horth took the ball, pointed at a target, and nailed it cold, knocking over one of the pots that contained a dead sprout. Keen grinned with pleasure. "Not bad." "Messy," complained Beryl. "Women always fuss," Keen told Horth. Not Hara, Horth thought. "You're a Nessac," Zrenal blurted, accusingly. Keen broke off his one-sided conversation with Horth to face Zrenal. "Yes," he replied calmly, "I am." "Did you think I was the only one?" Beryl asked tartly. "Or that my family forgot me when I came here to live in this awful court?" Keen put a hand on his sister's arm. "It's all right. Let the boy be angry. Of course his father's influence has been strong. That's why it is so important for you to come home now, as soon as possible." Beryl looked distraught. Brance broke ranks to fling himself into his mother's arms, crying, "No, no!" She wrapped her hands about Brance's dark head and held them against her skirts as he began to sob. Horth felt numb. "Why did you look at Horth like that earlier?" Zrenal asked Keen suspiciously. "If it wasn't because you were thinking he must be a reject." "Because he is the third child," Keen answered. "And he's already 4 years old. We had hoped—" He paused to capture Beryl's hand as if he wanted her to know it wasn't her fault. "We knew it would be so much to expect that one sweet girl could convince such a stubborn soul as the one your father possesses. But we had hoped that the marriage would work, and that there would be more children." "Hank still sees himself as Vrelish," Beryl admitted, defeated. "And so long as he consorts with vassals like Tash Brillet, he cannot be my husband, even if I will always be his wife in my heart." Zrenal fixed an angry gaze on Keen, muscles working in his square jaw. "This is all your fault," he confronted Keen. "When I grow up, I am going to challenge you." "As will be your right," Keen assured the eldest of his nephews. "The right of challenge is our sacred law as much as it is yours, but the terms of our agreement have expired. It is time to forge a new one, or take what we have gained and go home. One day you will understand." Beryl looked up at her brother with glistening green eyes, and Keen seemed likewise overcome momentarily with unvoiced emotion at the sight of her surrounded by her 3 boys. Then he laughed and took a step back, signaling a change in mood. "I forgot I have gifts to give out. The packages are in my room. Keep the boys here for me, Beryl. I will be back." Mother said, "Zrenal, please go with Keen to help him." Zrenal hesitated. Brance looked sullen. Mother touched Zrenal's shoulder the way she did when she meant one of her sons to mind her, and said firmly, "He is my brother." Zrenal swallowed, drew a deep breath, and went to join his Nessac uncle. "Where are you staying?" Horth heard Zrenal ask Keen. "Just down the hall in a guest room. My men are hosted elsewhere, though." "You've got men with you?" Zrenal asked, reluctantly becoming interested. "Are you an Abshah?" "2 of the men with me are Abshah," said Keen, amused. "I am an Imshah, a battle-wheel commander." He put an arm around Zrenal's shoulder. "Or I was, at least, during the war. Such titles mean relatively little now." The nursery doors closed on Zrenal's next admiring question. "Well?" Mother broke the awkward silence, brushing her skirts down the way she did when she was nervous or excited. "What do you suppose Keen brought for—" "I don't care!" Brance erupted. "I don't want it!" Mother reached for Brance as he bolted, but she couldn't catch him. "Brance!" she called again, more crossly, as he tore out of the nursery doors. Mother went after Brance. Horth followed, and all but ran into her standing still in the family hall. A commoner maid, laden with clean sheets, stood between her and the first room of the throat. "Horth," Beryl said, "go fetch your brother out of Greenhearth. I am sure that is where he's gone, and I won't have it. Not now." Horth darted down the throat, unimpeded by the household staff he dodged past. The Monetese herald stood outside the open doors of Greenhearth, flanked by errants and talking to Brance. The herald was a commoner, and while her manner and pronouns acknowledged Brance's status, her attitude was nonetheless very much one of an adult dealing with a child. "But I've got to see Tessitat," said Brance. "There's a Nessac in Blackhearth, and he wants to take us back to Sandhome, and I won't go." "Master Brance," the herald explained, "that isn't up to us, or Senior Lord Tessitat, or even our liege Daimon. It is your father's business." Tears stood in Brance's eyes. Horth did not like that. He thought Tessitap would come out if she was asked, but the herald would not do it for them. Quick as the thought occurred to him, Horth zipped past the herald and into Green Hearth. "Drat that child!" Horth heard one of the errants grumble. But Horth was already in Green Hearth's moist entrance hall with its walls covered in climbing vines. Cyrillus confronted them with a cold, calculating stare that made Horth remember his mother's stories about Guerrero Pol, who enslaved people with bioscience. Guerrero Pol exemplified the kind of commoners who had to be controlled by Sebelites. Hara said only the conscious bond that enslaved them to Sebelite masters made it safe for them to study science at all. Without it, they would use their knowledge to poison all existence with their greedy, short-sighted ambitions. "It's the Nessac brat," Cyrillus said bitterly, "the youngest one." Daimon appeared behind her, dogged by a couple more errants wearing his sword. "Horth?" he asked. "We ought to send him home with something catching to thin out the population on San Home before the next wave of them grows up." "Cyrillus!" Daimon's anger was biting. "Even meant in humor, that's a vile remark." She shrugged. "This one doesn't understand. He has a bad case of language impairment. The sort of child Red Vrelish call a reject, for the English word for something flawed, a child born with nothing but an animal mind. He's all spatial intelligence and reflexes." Daimon's lips were compressed in anger. "Leave us," he ordered the Guerrero Pol. Horth was pleased to see the order had an impact. Cyrillus left without another word. The Liege of Green Hearth forgot Horth as Branst arrived, escorted by the herald. "If Mother goes to San Home, can I stay here, in Green Hearth, please, Liege Monitum?" Branst begged. Daimon knelt down and took him by the shoulders. "I don't think that would be wise," he said. "But there are many places where a child can grow up safely, Branst Nersal. And when you have the choice, if you come back, you will be welcome here." Brandt's face was contorted by distress. His eyes looked rumpled, and his mouth looked as if hard G-forces were pulling down on it. But he let Daimon gather him up with Horth and walk them back to Blackhearth. Father met them in the Blackhearth entrance hall. "What will you do, Borello?" Daimon asked, as Branst and Horth left his side to join their father. Hangst put an arm around his sons, one on either side. "I do not know," he told Daimon. "May the gods ignore us, Daimon, I do not know." "If there is anything I can do to help," the Liege of Monitum began, and was cut off sharply by Liege Nersal's curt "no." Daimon nodded, turned, and was gone. Dinner was a grim and novel affair. It was the first time Horth remembered Mother serving dinner in the reception hall at the base of the spiral stairs that led up to the plaza. She refused to appear at meals served by commoners, and Father refused to let her serve the meal herself when Nersalians were present unless she was prepared to wait on his noble-born guests as well. Lywolf dutifully waited on the guests with her. It was funny to see the best swordsman among Mother's retainers behaving like a servant. But Keen's people asked for things politely, thanked him when he filled their glasses, and generally treated him with respect. It was only Father who ignored him, except for tensing whenever Lywolf passed behind his chair. Keen had brought a second Nessac with him, named Arn, who was a grim-looking man with tight lips and a cold manner. "Arn commanded a trio of battle wheels in the war," Keen told Zrenal. "Now he is a station master based in Red Reach near the jump to San Home. It's a vital position." Hangst accepted the next dish that Beryl set before him, sparing her a glance before fixing his eyes coldly on Keen once more. "Keen gave me a sword," said Zrenal. "It has an insignia on it that stands for the Royal House of Sarn." Hangst sipped his wine slowly, his face composed. "You already have a sword," he told Zrenal. "A child's sword," Zrenal defended his enthusiasm. Hangst dropped the subject. "San Home sounds Demish to me," he said bluntly, looking at Keen. "How can you claim to have more in common with we Nersalians who are Vrelish than you do with the Husian Demish, who reproduce through marriage and treat their daughters differently than their sons?" It was Arn who answered. "House Nersal has been influenced by bad breeding decisions." He raised the glass halfway to his lips. "Nersal Nessac mated with the Lovrel when he broke with his family and splintered a royal bloodline." Hangst was dryly amused. "Is that an accusatory tone I detect, Station Master Arn?" he asked. "And should I therefore assume that it is not my wife, that is, Beryl, who takes it as a fact that I am my ancestor Nersal Nessac? Tell me, do all Nessacs claim to be clear dreamers, able to recognize old souls in their new lives?" We are not all clear dreamers, Arn answered stiffly. No. The history of your soul, Keen explained conversationally, was proclaimed by Xerxes Okal at the end of the war and endorsed by a council of Xerstan. Ah, yes. Hangst paused as Beryl collected his plate and replaced it with the next course. He had hardly touched the salad made of vegetables hand-reared in Mother's greenhouse. Knowing how much Mother cared about her plants and how precious each harvest was, Horth made a special effort to eat all of his own salad before Lywolf picked his plate up, although he knew that it would disagree with him later. He had trouble digesting high-fiber foods. Daimon believes Xerxes is more politician than mystic, Hangst resumed. It was a female liege of Vrel who defeated you in Red Reach, although she died doing it. Vretla Vrel, Vakal's mother. You preferred to lay the credit to my account because you can't admit a woman would be such an able warrior. You needed some theologically satisfying explanation for why you had not prevailed. Proclaiming that a great soul as Zerrel was fighting on the wrong side was expedient. If you are calling the Xerxes a liar on the strength of a Monatee's opinion, Arn said tightly, perhaps you had better ask yourself first whether you place more faith in Monatee's honor than history justifies. Hangst leaned forward. Daimon, he said, is not a Laurel. He deals with them, said Arn, through Touchgate Hospital. Please, Keen interrupted, flicking his glance toward Horth and his brothers. If we have irreconcilable differences, there are better occasions for resolving them. Let the children enjoy their dinner. Agreed, Hank said, and settled back into the big chair at the head of the table. Arn's lips compressed tightly. No one drank or ate while they watched Hangst and Arn glare at each other. It was Branst, to Horth's surprise, who broke the silence. Do you have children? He asked Keen. I mean, since you said Arn is your brother-in-law, that means you're married, doesn't it? Keen turned to Branst with a smile. Absolutely, nephew. A Nessak warrior does not fly, if he can help it, until he's seen a freedom prize safely born. The more children a man has, the more courage he dares to show, because he knows he has a stake in the future that will draw his soul back into the living if he dies. My children are my greatest joy. I had 3 before your mother left home. I have 7 now. 5 boys and 2 girls. With the same wife? Branst asked, mildly awed. Keen laughed. Few Nessak men are brave enough to court more than one woman at a time, let alone stray from their marriage oath. Half the watching dead are female, you know. I think it would be highly ill-advised. That does sound demish, said Zrenal. Men who fight and women who look after children at home. I do not think the average Demish princess would fare very well as a Nessak wife and mother, Keen said with pride and a fond glance in his sister's direction. No, indeed, Beryl spoke for the first time, apart from giving orders to the retainer enlisted as a waiter. She had arrived with a dessert tray laden with sweet dishes of prepared fruit, and surveyed the assembled dinners with the no-nonsense air of command that she used when the family was alone. Nessak women run their households. A Demish princess would perish for the lack of a servant to lift her spoon. Having said what she wanted, Beryl began handing out the dinner bowls. Horth ate his mother's dessert with more pleasure than he had the salad, but equal certainty of bad results. By the time the meal was done, he was feeling uncomfortable as well as tired, and was glad to leave the adults to their stressful, mysterious talk, filled with hidden threats and awkward silences. Neither Branst nor Horth slept well in their shared room. Horth's stomach troubled him, and Branst tossed and turned in his dreams. Horth dropped off at last, only to be woken by Branst shouting, "Tess!" in the grip of a nightmare. Horth was on his feet immediately. Branst was sitting up in his bed, blinking, his face pale in the dim light from the glow strip along the base of one wall. I thought the Nessaks killed her, Branst explained ruefully. Horth climbed into bed with Branst and both of them slept better. Hours later, Horth woke to the sound of a bedroom door opening. He saw Father and Keen peek in, keeping it only slightly ajar to reduce the amount of light spilling in from the family hall. Horth was not afraid. He knew, with the natural insight of a child, that they were being admired. There would be one more condition, Keen said, standing shoulder to shoulder with Father in the sliver of light from the hall. You will have to stay married to my sister, truly married to her, if I lose, of course. Hangst said, I haven't agreed yet. Keen said, I think you have. Both men withdrew then, closing the door softly behind them, and Horth heard no more. He slept late the next morning. When he went down to the octagon to exercise, Hara had already been and gone. Zrenal was there instead, trying out his new sword with Arn. "Horth!" Zrenal hailed him. "Do you know what Brant's got from Keen? Books! One of them has stuff in it about us. What do you think about that? We get put into books on San Hum." Horth wasn't sure he was as pleased about it as Zrenal. He headed for the nursery, expecting to find his mother there. Instead, he found his own present. Keen had cleared a space near the greenhouse and erected a three-dimensional frame that was 3 times as large as Horth. The frame supported pieces of a space station in miniature. Keen was still there, working on it. He noticed Horth and stopped in the act of attaching a spar. "Seems I'll be here for a few days," Keen said. "So I thought I'd show you how to put your gift together." Horth came forward, devouring the present with his eyes. He'd been to the hull steel casting fields near Tark and had a tour of a working space station. He was so excited that he had a tantrum when Father made him leave before he wanted to go. But the worst of it was that everything was much too hard to understand. Whole steel shells were cast in space all at once. You had to comprehend the whole cast in one gulp, not put it together in pieces. What he saw in front of him now was a space station that he could assemble. Keen slid clear of the frame he'd erected and got to his feet. "Beryl told me in her letters that you like to take things apart. I thought you might enjoy putting something together, too." He gestured at the barely begun structure and the heap of pieces laid out on the floor. "It's a scale model. We use them to rehearse a real job. The frame goes first. That's the hardest, because it's built in zero-G conditions and no external links to put up with that. We add spin as soon as we can, then a couple of rim docks on the outer edge with quarters so the crew can stay on board. But in the early stages, all the work is done in zero-G." He smiled a bit ruefully. "Sometimes your head can feel like it's about to explode." Horth crouched to inspect the pieces on the floor. There were so many, and each one looked purposeful. It was still only a model, but he had the feeling everything would be there. Everything would have an explanation, and he couldn't see how to assemble it alone. He picked up a particularly complicated-looking piece with a moving part. He would need someone to show him how it all fitted together. The look he gave Keen spoke volumes. The Nesak took the piece in Horth's hand from him, held it up against the frame, and said, "This is a part of the air circulation system and board of the main floor. It has valves like vanes do, to seal off sections if there's a problem. Let's see. It might go here, for example." Keen held the piece up in the empty air, inside the bare frame. The next few hours established a routine that lasted for the whole 3 days of Keen's visit. Horth joined Keen in the nursery after breakfast, and they worked together until Mother came to feed them at lunch. One of Keen's Nesaks usually joined them for the meal, and sometimes Zrenal did too. Everyone talked about the progress Keen and Horth were making with the station. No one talked about anything important. He didn't understand why Brantz had torn up Keen's books and wouldn't speak to him anymore, or why Zrenal looked so grim, even though Father seemed more relaxed now than he had at the first day of dinner. Horth didn't understand why the Nesaks cast long looks at Keen filled with tension, or why Mother dropped dishes so often. When Keen wasn't looking, sometimes Mother stared at him and began to look anguished. But when Keen looked at her and smiled, she tried to hide it. Evenings, Mother spent alone with Father. There were no more meals taken altogether. People said things that Horth tried to ignore. One of the Nesaks, making small talk about the model station, said, "But will it be finished before—" and stopped when Mother dropped her watering can. Keen picked it up and held her hand steady when he gave it to her. "If you remain here," he told her, "have more children. I will come to you through one of them, I promise." He smiled in his easy, casual way that exuded confidence. "And if you come home, the children you already have will bring his soul back to us." Keen's tone of voice was not the least alarming, but the brief exchange killed all conversation. Keen stayed later than usual that day, working with Horth on the station. In the afternoons, Keen worked out on the octagon with the other Nesaks, but always with screens up. Not even Zrenal was invited inside to watch. Hara skulked about outside the screens when they sparred until Father banned her from the octagon. In 3 days, people said, Keen's travel respite would be over. Horth knew what a travel respite was. It meant that pilots were entitled to rest for 3 days between arrival and departure. He half expected that the grown-ups had decided that he and his brothers would be going home with Mother when the 3 days were up, and nobody wanted to tell them for fear Branst might try to run away. But the tensions and people around Black Hearth told him that whatever was about to happen threatened Father. And Mother spent as much time with Father in the evenings as she did with Keen during the day, although Horth never saw Keen and Hanks together. The bits and pieces of information at Horth's command would not fit together in a good way, like the model. He preferred to leave them lying on the nursery floor. On the 4th day, it was much too quiet in Black Hearth. Mother dressed in a formal white gown, her long black hair tied at the back. She wore the family crest of the House of Sarn at her waist, above a rectangle of embroidered cloth depicting the Rel symbol entwined with the Nessak flail and sword. She also wore the dragon of House Nersal embroidered on the long vest that fell to the floor. "Dress quickly, Horth," she said when she came to wake him up. "We're going to watch a duel." Horth knew that duels were serious. He dressed fast, but he was so fixated on the station, which was not yet finished, that he was fully expected to get back to it as soon as this was done. Zrenel and Branst were already down on the octagon when Beryl arrived with Horth. Father and Keen stood on the challenge floor dressed in light shirts and snug stretch pants. Arn and the rest of the Nessaks, including Mother's retainers, stood about in a clump, outnumbered 3-1 by another clump of Kimp Stan that included a robust-looking woman who wore her hair in twisted bands bound tightly to her scalp. Her vest displayed the braid patterns of House Brillet with liege marks at her collar. All the screens were down, making one big open space with the challenge floor surrounded by 8 wedges of property belonging to the hearths above them. There were people on Green Wedge, including Daimon, Cyrillus, and Tessitat. On Red Wedge, there were 24 nobleborns from Spiral Hall, at Daimon's invitation since they lacked a highborn. Blue Wedge and Silver Wedge were filled with rows of elaborately dressed Demish, the sword-bearing men standing at the front, and the women on raised seats behind them. Daimon came forward to where Horth's father stood on the challenge floor. "Angst," Daimon said, in a firm voice that was perfectly audible from where Horth stood beside his mother. "Do not do this. Let her go." Hengst said no. Daimon sighed. "Very well, then." He stepped back and declared to those gathered on all 8 wedges, "You are called here to witness the resolution of a dispute to be settled by a duel to the death, or until one adversary cannot rise again. The stake is one of mutual agreement endorsed by seconds. I stand as heir of Liege Nersal's intentions in this matter. Station Master Arn of the Nessaks agrees to support the terms of the duel on behalf of Keen Nessak, Prince of the Royal House of Sarn. The terms are as follows. If Keen wins, he leaves court unmolested with his full sib Beryl and her sons. If Hanks Nersal wins, Beryl remains here as his wife." Daimon had to push his way past the offending word. "On the condition," Daimon concluded, "that they live as man and wife by Nessak standards and continue to have children together." The watching Kimp Stan stirred in discomfort, but Daimon's announcement seemed to be news to no one except Horth and Branst. Branst looked from Keen to his father and back again with an anguished expression before he began to tremble. Zrenel watched the challenge floor with stoic calm. Beryl took Horth's hand. There were a few more declarations, binding the witnesses to observe that the duel was entered into in good faith under sword law, and obliging them to honor its terms and to judge whether it was fairly fought. Any Kimp Stan who wished to oppose Hank's decision to fight, or the terms he had agreed upon, were invited to step forward to challenge Hangst. The robust woman with the black braids clenched her jaw and worked her hand on the grip of her sword. But no Kimp Stan came forward. Daimon retreated off the challenge floor, and the duel began. Beryl tightened her grip on Horth's hand. Horth kept his eyes on the duel between father and the new friend who ought to be helping him finish the space station right now. Keen attacked savagely. Their blades clashed in tight slashes, and sparks flew from one exchange, startling Horth. Then the action seemed to come in bunches, as Keen slowly stalked father. It seemed that Keen wanted Horth's father to thrust his point into his defense, but father was staying well back. Their faces were taut masks of concentration. This was not practice. Horth grasped the difference. Father was waiting for something. For what? Thought Horth. For a mistake? Horth could not decide whether he wanted Keen to realize this too. Then the mistake happened. Keen committed himself too deeply and had his blade taken. Mother's hand clenched. Horth looked up into her stricken face to see grief and passion blazing in her eyes. A thump on the challenge floor reclaimed Horth's attention. He looked back in time to see Father standing over his defeated challenger. At his back, Cyrillus hovered with her medical kit in hand. "Let the medic help you," Father ordered Keen. He seemed angry now, no longer cool and calculating. Keen clenched his failing strength in one surge, the whole side of his chest glistening red from a cut at the base of his neck, and swung his sword up in a slashing arc. Father caught the slash just above his hilt and seized the middle section of the blade in his bare left hand, holding it immobile without disarming the dying man. He muttered, "Akrel," like a prayer, or a curse, or a farewell, and slashed Keen's throat. There was so much blood, Horth marveled at how it had all fit inside Keen's body to start. Mother gave a stifled gasp and fell to her knees as they buckled. Zrenal rushed to support her, displacing Horth. Father did not look at her. The eyes he sought were those of Daimon, in his green vest embroidered with threads of red and brown. Daimon looked back, expressionless. Beryl got up, brushing aside Zrenal's attentions. She walked off Black Wedge as if in a trance, and over to where Keen had fallen. The 4 men of her entourage moved to block anyone from interfering, and they were joined in their wordless support by Arn and Keen's other 2 retainers. Beryl knelt in her brother's blood, making a low, keening sound, and put her hands into the spreading pool surrounding him. The noise she made became a grief song. It was a song she had taught her sons in the nursery, a song that promised to keep faith with honor and reject revenge. It promised to live in wisdom under Okal, and it promised to make new children for the mourned one to be reborn so he could fight the just fight of the people once more. When the song stopped, Beryl raised her hands and stroked her bloody palms over her bare arms and white gown. A buzz of conversation started, low and urgent, coming mostly from the Demish witnesses. The Vrelish watched in silence from the red, green, and black wedges. Beryl put her hands into the pool of warm blood again, and this time marked her face with gore. Demish witnesses talked louder. Vrelish ones began to stir. Horth understood this was grief. It exercised a magnetic pull on Beryl's sons. He thought about joining her, and realized that Zrenal had already stepped forward. "No," Father intercepted Zrenal, still holding the sword he had used to kill Keen. "Go inside," he told them, "all 3 of you." Branst bolted. Horth followed. He was weaving through a loose crowd of relatives just as everyone on the octagon drew their swords and raised them, shouting Okal Rel in unison, like an earthquake of movement and sound, declaring the matter resolved. Branst was pounding up the spiral staircase at the back of Black Wedge. Horth caught up. They emerged more or less together in Blackheart's reception hall, where they had eaten dinner with Keen 3 days earlier. Branst plunged down the throat towards Family Hall. Horth followed. Inside the nursery, Branst let out a wild cry, half laugh and half shout, kicking things aside as he crossed the floor. A small, hard ball went flying into Horth and Keen's nearly finished space station. Pieces flew from it at the point of impact, and the whole structure shook, spoiling 100 painstaking alignments. Branst froze. He looked at Horth as if he had accidentally killed someone. Horth knelt down, picked a piece that had fallen to the floor, and remembered how Keen had showed him where to place it the day before. "Gee, Horth," Branst said, chagrined. "I didn't mean—" "Akrel," Horth said, and set the piece down. "What?" Branst floundered, astonished. "Akrel," Horth said again, and rose, leaving the broken piece behind him. They were strong words. The same words Father spoke to Keen. Words that acknowledged the pain in any triumph. Words that promised things could matter, terribly, and not bring the world to an end in one fatal spasm. A promise that life could outlive quarrels, even if they had to be fatal for someone. "You talked," Branst said, blinking, and blurted a laugh. Horth frowned. He wanted to share all he felt, but he didn't know how. Zrenal came in behind them, and Branst turned to him excitedly. He spoke, Brance told Zrenal. Horth said something. He did? The older boy asked, in a daze. Say it again, Horth, Brance insisted. But to say it again might make it feel less important somehow. Horth walked towards the damaged model space station. Silently, he began exploring the wound where the ball had struck. Horth! Brance cried, exasperated. Zrenal said, Give it up, Brance. He lodged himself against the rope wall that they used to climb to the platform that served as 100 different destinations. The rope swayed as he got settled. It's good Father won, Brance said momentarily, subdued now. Of course, Zrenal snapped. I didn't want Father to die, you know, I just didn't want... Zrenal jerked on a stretch of rope. It doesn't matter. Horth spotted a bent spar. Everything would have to be taken apart to that point to get at it, but first he'd have to memorize the way the pieces fit together so he could put them back again afterwards. I know what I said about hating Nessax, Brance muttered. But I didn't want Keen to die either. I mean, I don't see why he didn't let the Green Hearth medic help him. There was a patch of silence that lasted 5 breaths. Then Zrenal said in an odd tone of voice. He knew it would sully him. He paused. It was something to see, wasn't it? That kind of courage? But Daimon's medic... Daimon! Zrenal said angrily, pulling himself straight up with his hands gripping the ropes on either side of him. Laurel's trained that medic. Laurel's trained all of them. Brance lapsed into a brooding silence. I guess it's just... too bad. Well, Zrenal told him in a grown-up, older brother tone of voice, we couldn't go to Sandhome and stay here too, so now it's decided. Will there be another war? Brance asked. You heard them shouting Okal Rel on the Octagon, Zrenal said, still sounding knowledgeable. No war. Besides, if there was, we'd beat them again, no problem. So long as the Red Vrellers stick with Dad. And Monitum, Brance said stubbornly. Zrenal shrugged. I don't know whether that's so important. What have the Monetees got for highborns? Just Daimon and a couple of Paul's scholars hidden away on their homeworld. Uncle Keen was right about one thing for certain. Being too scared of challenge rights to breed, like Daimon, is as stupid in the end as it is cowardly. Brance began to cry without warning. If you're going to start that, Zrenal blustered, and gave up as his own voice faltered. Oh, come here. He scooped Brance into a strong embrace and held him. Horth paused. He couldn't focus on the station while his brothers were distracting him. Akrel, Horth told himself again, silently, surprised to discover words could be so powerful. He would practice them with Brance, Horth decided. Just Brance, until he got better. But he knew he must practice no matter how hard it was. He needed to learn a lot more about the things people disagreed about in his family. Daimon, Liege of Monitum, sat behind the massive oakwood desk in his library, a piece of furniture so old that the trees it was made of had matured on the earth itself, before war had consumed mankind's homeworld. He reads aloud from a beautifully illustrated storybook in his hands. Kisk of all the people, said Nersal Nessak, you tell me the Vrelish are animals and have no souls. I tell you, I have felt their souls in soul touch. It is a simple matter. Let me prove it to you. Take the test of souls with my Vrelish Borello, and you will know what I have to say to you is true. But his father turned his back and said, no. Daimon looked up. The rest is torn out. Behind him, Tessatat scuffed the toe of her boot on the parquet floor. Brance was upset about the idea of going to Sandhome, she told her uncle. That is no excuse for damaging a book, said Daimon, closing the maimed artifact. What does it mean, anyway? Asked Tessatat. Daimon folded his arms. I expect it is the Nessak's version of Prince Nersal's defection in -610 by the Americ calendar, which would be the year 170 by their own. They count forward from the Revelation. That's what the Nessaks call it when they decided they were something quite different from any of the founding houses of the Empire. It was the era of the Purity Wars, where drawing lines around which souls were in or out of which genetic pool was in vogue. Rather than view themselves as Demish-Vrelish hybrids, the Black Vrelish, as Nessaks were known back then, decided they were pure Nessak and invented a mythology to back them up. I do not know all of the details. Monitum itself went through a civil war not long before, and there was some disruption in the logs. He glanced towards the green leather-bound books that lined his library walls. Tessitat made a gesture as if to bat away all the talk of history, which vexed Daimon. He had planned to be a sanctuary scholar dedicated to the study of the Monetese logs. But that was before the Nessac War, and before the disgrace of his predecessor, Darren, who had died in it. Darren, whose children were slaughtered by their Vrelish mother when he was caught having sex with boys. Every time he thought about Darren, Daimon flinched inside, because he knew that he still shared Darren's affliction, despite a lifetime of denial, and he didn't know if Monitum could survive a second scandal of that magnitude. Sternly, he reminded himself that nothing could go wrong as long as he never expressed his slaw desires. No one living knew except Daimon and his bonded Guerrero pull, and Cyrillus was even more dedicated to Monitum's survival than he was. So, summed up Tessitat, House Nersal split from the Nessacs and inherited the mantle of Black Vrelish because of a dispute about whether or not the Red Vrelish have souls? It would seem so, Daimon said, mildly. What do they believe now? Asked Tessitat. Ask Branst, said Daimon. I imagine his mother has taught him a thing or two. The Green Hearth Herald knocked crisply at the library door. Daimon knew it was her from the knock, and had expected to hear from her. He called, Enter. His herald came in and paid her respects with a slight nod. She was a commoner, but well-educated, and a valuable member of the household. Liege Nersal? Daimon asked at once. In the Azir Lounge, she told him, waiting for you. Daimon scooped the Nessac book off the desk and headed for the small private reception room. Tessitat began to follow, but he shook his head and raised his palm, warding her off. He needed to talk to his Brerello alone. Daimon's friend and ally waited for him, seated on a couch that looked small and faintly ridiculous when burdened by Hanks Nersal's powerful form. He looked pleased with himself and high on adrenaline, the elation of surviving his damn-fool duel with the Nessac only starting to wear off. What is it? Hanks Nersal greeted his friend's intense expression. By the look of you, a man would think you were sorry I won, he laughed. Daimon opened his mouth to deny the claim and found himself inclined to punch Hanks instead, right in his broad, grinning jaw. A flicker of involuntary attraction, of the kind he could not tolerate in himself, attempted to assert itself and was aggressively quashed. But it left a sting of lingering self-hatred. Of course I'm glad you are alive, Daimon told Hanks as calmly as he was able to. How long do you think it will last? Hanks frowned. I have more friends than enemies among the Kimstan. Even Brillet kept her sword sheathed. You saw that. I did, said Daimon. But I find it acutely uncomfortable that I am likely to agree with the next member of your extended family who carries an objection as far as the challenge floor. Challenge me yourself, then, and get it over with, said Hanks, and surged up, half serious. Daimon took an involuntary step back. They froze that way for a moment, Daimon ashamed of what he felt, Hanks in complete ignorance. Then he noticed the book in Daimon's hand. One of Keen's presents? Hanks asked, recognizing the Nessac designs on the cover. Branst left it here, Daimon told Hanks, holding it out to him. I thought you might want it back. Hanks took the book in his large, capable hands. What does it say? He asked. You can read it, Daimon told him. It is written in Gilak. Don't play games with me, Daimon, said Hanks. Tell me what it means and I will listen. Daimon warned himself again against the seduction of pride, but he was pleased to be asked and to know that his opinion would be valued. He gave in with a thin sigh. It's propaganda, he told Hanks. Stories for children that explain the world view of Xerxes Okal and his council. You are Nersal Nessac reborn, and the war failed because you were on the wrong side. Your children are a possible conduit for reclaiming your soul for the Nessac cause, and maybe even the soul of San Nersal herself into the bargain, presumably through a female child. Daimon frowned. Although I do not understand their reverence for San Nersal, since she was the quintessential female warrior, which is no longer acceptable on San Home. Hanks grinned at his friend's serious manner. You haven't got a drop of mystical blood in your body, Borello. Maybe that's your problem. He gestured with his free hand. Or she might have been a real Nessac woman, forced to live a Vrelish lifestyle to redeem herself from past transgressions. What you need to understand the Nessacs, my dear Daimon, concluded Hangst, is a vivid imagination. To understand them, Daimon said stonily, or to be seduced by them. Hangst lost his good humor. What exactly are you accusing me of? Are you Nersal Nesak reborn? Daimon asked. Has she convinced you of that? Of course not. Why not? Daimon insisted. You believe very literally in rebirth. I am not a dry-hearted cynic like you, no, said Hangst, but that doesn't mean I believe priestly lies, such as noble-borns lacking souls. And commoners, Daimon added. Hangst batted aside the qualification with a dismissive gesture. This is pointless. No, Daimon insisted, it is not. The Nesaks want one thing from you, and whatever stories they make up, I don't think they'll object as long as they get it. They want to unite Nesaks and Nersalians, and they want to do it because they know they'll never beat the allied Vrelish powers as long as we all stand together. All three of us? Hangst asked, very soberly. You and me and Okal? Daimon braced himself for what he knew was coming. It was a sore spot with Hangst that Red Hearth continued to stand empty. Any word at all from Okal? Hangst prompted. Daimon shook his head. I've got people looking, but it isn't easy to find Vrelish highborns when they retreat to their cold moons and deep space hideaways. I've left word with stationers where possible, asking Okal to show up or to send his heir to occupy Red Hearth more regularly, to remind the Demish we are not the only Vrelish in the Empire. Hangst snorted. If the Red Vrelish can be said to be a part of the Empire. Daimon swallowed down a sharp lump of dread. He knew his own fleet would only be of moderate assistance the next war, because all the Relshaw were noble-born. Hangst clapped Daimon firmly on the shoulder. My thanks for the book, and for being my judge of honor. We will talk again later. Daimon smiled back, reassured by Hangst's hearty manner and regretting his doubts. I should get back to Beryl, Hangst added, collecting his sword from the rack by the door. She is badly shaken by the death of her brother. He paused before adding, He was a good man for a Nesak, keen Nesak, and I will honor our bargain. He glanced briefly towards the corners of the room, the way that people did when they were thinking of the watching dead, and smiled a little. For a whole minute after Hangst had left Azure Lounge, Daimon stood frozen, struggling to dispel the chill on his heart. In the end, he managed to convince himself that, contrary to Hangst's opinion, he did, indeed, have too active an imagination. Hangst had lived with Beryl Nesak as his wife for years, and apart from the untimely deaths of a few Kimpstan challengers, nothing very terrible had happened. Maybe this new arrangement would not prove all that different.